Hello everyone, I am Rakhimov Abdulloh, the student of XP19. Today I want to give you some information about the Belgian dioxin crisis. Let's start. Our presentation consists of abstract, introduction, crisis management and communication, dioxin, Belgian dioxin crisis, and conclusion. Abstract. In the spring of 1999, dioxin was introduced into the Belgian food supply, including exports via contaminated animal fat used in animal feed supplied to Belgian, French, and Dutch farms. Hence, pigs and cattle ate the contaminated feed, and high levels of dioxin were found in meat products as well as eggs. What followed was yet another European food safety scandal filled with drama and public outcry. There were government investigations, the removal and destruction of tons of eggs and meat products, and huge economic losses. The case study of this incident reported here illustrates how the crisis unfolded and evaluates how the Belgian government managed and communicated this crisis based on publicly available documentation. The government's major error was it didn't promptly go public with knowledge of crisis, resulting in accusations of a self-serving cover-up. The government's poor crisis management and communication strategy became the focus of intense public and media criticism and blame. Moreover, the significant issue of poor quality control in the food and feed industries was pushed to the sideline. Not only was the reputation of the food supply tarnished, but public confidence in the government was damaged, leading to the resignations of 2 cabinet ministers and the ousting of the ruling party in a national election. Introduction. A crisis can hit any organization unexpectedly and have devastating results such as harm or injury to people or the environment. Short-term damage such as loss of money and business can be amplified by potential long-term effects such as lawsuits, loss of confidence and trust, and a damaged reputation. Whether it's an airplane crash, an accident at a chemical plant, tampering of a drug, or an outbreak of foodborne illness, a crisis generates significant media coverage and public formation of attitudes and beliefs is often swift and dramatic. Quality assurance programs cannot completely protect against crises from occurring and must be complemented with effective crisis communications strategies which may mitigate against excessive losses for the organization in question. The case study examined the Belgian dioxin contamination crisis of the summer of 1999. The events of the crisis were reconstructed from international media reports and from press releases from the Belgian government as well as the European Union. The effects of management and communication strategy are discussed, emphasizing how the damage sustained by the government and the lack of criticism of the real culprits in the crisis were a result of government's mismanagement of the crisis. Crisis management and communication. Crisis definition, nature, and consequences. A crisis is an accident involving a hazard that threatens or is perceived to threaten the safety or health of the public, the environment, and reputation of a particular organization. Examples can be threats to safety and health, but can also include civil lawsuits, law violations, accusations, complaints, and labor disputes. What makes an incident a crisis in the constant and intense public scrutiny via the media beginning early in the incident, before it has been resolved. In a crisis situation, the incident is highly visible and the stakes and risk for the organization are high. While the public is aware of the problem, the crisis unfolds rapidly, erratically, and unpredictably with frequent and almost reports from the media. As a result, organizations sometimes feel the crisis is beyond its control. The dynamic nature of a crisis requires that the organization to be dynamic, flexible, and prompt in this response. The organization's primary concern during a crisis should be stigma management, which includes the following 5 components: effective and rapid surveillance systems, effective communication about the nature of risk, a credible, open, and responsive regulatory system, demonstrable efforts to reduce level uncertainty and risk, evidence that actions match words. The do's of crisis communication. The goal of effective crisis communication is to accurately present as soon as possible the organization's standpoint, which must be perceived as being open, honest, proactive, responsible, and concerned. The organization must tell the public what the problem is. The organization must take immediate action to deal with the situation and with the public concerns. Actions must quickly follow words. These actions should minimize any further risk to the public and should ensure that the problems doesn't happen again. These actions must be promptly communicated. The organization has to be seen to the protagonist in the charge and actively working to solve the problem. Crisis communication is a way for the organization to assert some control over how the situation is being reported and perceived. By asserting this control, the organization can use media to its advantage to communicate its message instead of being victimized by the media by not being in control. The dawns of crisis communication. Poor crisis communication will result in other opposing and speculative points of view receiving a larger amount of media coverage. This creates allegations with little evidence, exaggerated perceptions of risk, rumors, public anxiety and fear, and ultimately a damaged image and public confidence. There are many common mistakes in crisis communication. Lack of prompt communication with the media even when there isn't very much information available, or appearing defensive will lead the media and crisis critics to assume the organization is denying or downplaying the existence of a problem. Failure to address the perceived problem, no matter how large the problem actually is, will result in public turning against the organization. The organization will be antagonized throughout the crisis, and trust and credibility will be very difficult to regain. If the organization doesn't create its own message in its own terms about the real issues at stake, another message will be created for it, which may or may not be truthful. The result is confusion and the contradiction between the organization and the media throughout the crisis. Dioxin. Definition of dioxin. Dioxin is a general term referring to different forms of stable, lipid-soluble, polyhydrogenated brominated dibenzoprodioxins. Included in this group is a much studied 2,3,7,8 tetrahydrobenzodioxin. There are several other halogenated aromatic compounds also classified as dioxin-like because they have similar toxic effects and are through the toxic via common mechanism. These include polyhydrogenated brominated dibenzofurans biphenyls, that is PCBs, naphthalines, and others. Toxicity. Dioxins are stable in the environment and in organism, resisting degradation and metabolism. They accumulate in fatty tissue in organisms and are thus not excreted. In humans, the half-life is an average of 7 years. Organochlorines such as dioxins are known to biomagnify, meaning that the concentration increases as it moves up the food chain. Thus, low levels of dioxin in the environment when taken up by plants and then eaten by animals and humans, will show up in increased levels of the organisms higher up in the food chain. The best known method of destroying dioxin is incineration at a temperature of at least 580 degrees Celsius. Sources and prevalence of dioxin in the environment and food. Dioxins are byproducts of industrial chemical processes. They are released into the environment when the chemical reactions are not properly controlled or when the wastes are mismanaged. Organochlorine products such as some herbicides and chlorophenol used for wood preservation can be contaminated with byproducts like dioxin during production. Belgian dioxin crisis. In January 1999, 50 kilogram polyhrominated biphenyls, that is, I also said PCBs contaminated with 1 gram dioxins, were accidentally added to a stock of recycled fat used for the production of 500 tons animal feed in Belgium. Although signs of poultry poisoning were noticed by February 1999, the extent of the contamination was publicly announced only in May 1999, when it appeared that more than 2,500 poultry and pig farms could have been involved. This has resulted in a major food crisis known worldwide as the Belgian PCB dioxin crisis. The crisis was resolved by the implementation of a large food monitoring program. When PCB concentrations exceeded the tolerance levels of 100, 200, or 1,000 ng per grams, fat for milk, meat, or animal feed, respectively, the 17 toxic polyhrominated dibenzodioxins and furans congeners were also determined. By December 1999, more than 55,000 PCB and 500 dioxin analyses were already done by Belgian and international laboratories. The highest concentrations of PCB and dioxins and the highest percentage of affected animals were found in poultry. Several important consequences of the food crisis were: the first is the introduction in 1999 of norms of PCB in feedstuff and food in Belgium, followed by the introduction in 2002 of European harmonized norms for PCDD in animal feed and food of animal origin. Second, the systematic nations monitoring of food of animal origin. The third, the creation of the Federal Agency for Food Safety in Belgium. The human health risk following this major incident was assessed with contradictory results. It was suggested that since only a limited proportion of the food chain was contaminated, it's unlikely that adverse effects were inflicted in the Belgian population. However, another assessment suggests that neurotoxic and behavioral effects in neonates, together with an increase in the number of cancers, may be observed. In conclusion, the dioxin scandal was a classic example of a crisis. There was a perceived threat to public health targeting the basic dietary staples and thus affecting everyone. There was intense media coverage and many stakeholder groups were reacting strongly because the stakes were high. Not only health, but reputation, money, political careers, and livelihoods were on the line. There always seemed to be some degree of information vacuum throughout the crisis, as information was slowly discovered and released. In this vacuum, there was plenty of speculation resulting in confusion and loss of control by the government. The dioxin scandal was a classic example of a crisis. there were several factors which complicated the crisis, of which were beyond the Belgian government's control. The factors served to make stigma associated with dioxin, the food supply, and the Belgian government more difficult to manage. In this day of extensive international trade, a domestic problem became an international nightmare. Because of the large-scale centralized production and distribution systems churning out food at a high rate and volume, a single source contamination became a widespread and fast-moving problem, resulting in the public possibly being exposed to contaminated, resulting in the public food before the government knew the problem. The weakness of the Belgian food and agriculture industry were exposed, and the Belgian international reputation was tarnished. This food safety crisis pushed and hopefully will continue to push the Europeans harmonize and tighten regulations and controls of its agri-food industry. 133. The dioxin crisis played a role in instigating the European adoption on January 12 of 2000 of the White Paper on Food Safety, calling for the formation of an independent European food authority. In March 2000, legalization to tighten up the animal feed regulations and to give the more power in enforcing these regulations. The Belgian dioxin crisis will hopefully also show governments the importance of crisis communications and stigma management in minimizing damage to their credibility and reputation. Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, please contact me on my mail. Thank you.